Welcome to PSAC's Black History Month panel. I am speaking with you from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples who have been on these lands for time immemorial. I am grateful to speak from this land and commit myself to the struggle against systems of oppression that have displaced Indigenous people of their lands and denied them their rights to self-determination. My name is Sharon D'Souza. I'm the National Executive Vice President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. I'm here to welcome and introduce today's panelists and our moderator, Craig Reynolds, Regional Executive Vice President for Ontario for PSAC. So without further ado, I'll begin with Jan. Jan Simpson is the National President for the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. A postal worker for over 30 years, Jan became involved with the union early on in her career. As a Black woman fighting injustice daily, union work is a natural fit. Advocating for and witnessing the power of people working together to affect real transformative change is her passion. Jan is the first Black person to be elected to CUPW's National Executive Committee when she was elected first National Vice President in 2015. She is successfully ran for the CUPW President in 2019, being the first Black woman to become president and lead a national union in Canada. Jan received the Urban Alliance on Race Relations 2019 Labor Award and was the 2020 Legacy Award honoree for the National Congress of Black Women Foundation. That same year, she joined the board of the Atkinson Foundation, which fights for social and economic justice in Ontario, and in 2022 became president of the UNI Global Union, America's post and logistic sector. She's also a proud member of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. Jan's passion remains as strong now as it was when she first became involved in the labor and social justice movements. She continues to fight injustice on the work floor, in our communities, our country, and around the world. She makes space and lets people know that there is place for everyone as the authentic selves within these movements. As long as Jan is with CUPW, is the CUPW president, and long after, she will always fight for workers to have voice and to be treated with dignity and respect. Next, I have Jason McLean, who is the Secretary Treasurer for the National Union of Public and General Employees. Jason was elected president of the Nova Scotia Government and General Employees Union, Nova Scotia's largest public sector union, in May 2016 and 2019. In 2022, he advanced to the position of Secretary Treasurer of the National Union of Public and General Employees. Born and raised in Whitney Pier, Cape Breton, Jason grew up understanding the importance of diversity, fairness, and equality. His mother is a community leader, a former school board representative, and a retired early childhood educator. His father is a retired firefighter. In 1995, Jason began his career in the public service as a corrections officer, first at the Cumberland Correctional Facility in Amherst, and then at the Cape Breton Correctional Facility in Sydney. Jason became a leader in his union local and soon was elected to the NSGEU Board of Directors, provincial executive, and became president in 2016. In his new role as Secretary Treasurer of the National Union of Public and General Employees, he strives to be a leader focused on problem solving and creating more fair, equitable, and inclusive workplaces in Canada. Jason was elected to attend the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference program in 2015 and is a graduate of the distinguished Harvard Trade Union program. Marc-Edouard Jobert, President, Regional Council, Fédération des Travailleurs et Travailleuses de Québec. Marc-Edouard is the son of Haitian parents who immigrated to Montreal in 1966. From a very young age, Marc-Edouard learned about difference and, more importantly, the weight that it carries. After working for Canada Post and seeing examples of other workers involved in union activity inspired him to do the same. After having patiently climbed through the rungs of union leadership, Marc-Edouard held numerous positions within the Canadian Union of Postal Workers between 2004 and 2016. Brother Marc-Edouard was elected by acclamation the president of the FTQ Montreal Metropolitan Regional Council in 2016, 2019, and 2022, where he has been involved since 2022. His many positions within union taught him that defending the interests of the many must never interfere within the needs of the most vulnerable of groups demanding equity within the union. His field of interests are many and varied, from theology and sociology to philosophy. He is concerned with relationships we have with each other, how we exercise power, structures of oppression, and the power of worker solidarity and action. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce your moderator for today's panel, and that's Craig Reynolds. Born in Jamaica, Craig migrated to Canada when he was 19 to join his family in search of better economic opportunities. His employment in the federal public service began with a term assignment at the Immigration and Refugee Board. After a few short-term contracts, Craig began to realize that the public service was no longer a source of secure, long-term employment. Instead, he and many of his colleagues were caught in a cycle of precarious employment, ranging from short-term contracts to term appointments and casual work. To address this injustice and the racism he witnessed, Craig quickly got involved with his union at the local level. His first elected position was in 2009 when he became a steward for the Union of National Employees. Later in 2011, he was elected vice president for the local and then elected local president in 2013. Craig has been active in several union committees such as the PSAC, Toronto Racially Visible Committee, and the Greater Toronto Area Council. Craig stepped into the role of Ontario Regional Executive Vice President in September 2020 and then was elected Ontario REVP at the 2021 Ontario Regional Convention. Craig believes that the labor movement must put special focus on connecting with young workers, combating systemic racism, and prioritizing organizing new workplaces. So I will turn it over to Craig to start our panel off.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Sharon. Hello, everyone. I would like to remind you that there is interpretation in English and French available via Zoom, so please ensure that you click on the language that suits you best. We received some great questions from participants throughout the registration portal. We received some great questions from participants through the registration portal, and the questions for the panelists are based on your questions. If we have time, additional questions can be asked through the Q&A button, so feel free to ask your questions there throughout the entire session. Please note that there is no chat function. Should you experience technical problems, please seek assistance in the Q&A. Before we begin, I want to provide an update on the anti-racism work our union is doing. Over the past 2 years, many PSAC members have shared painful stories of discrimination, employee exclusion, and racial trauma following the launch of the Black class action lawsuit. Nearly 1,500 plaintiffs have signed up. About 70% have self-identified as women, and at least 73% are PSAC members. That is a testament to their strength. Over the next few months, you may be contacted by a PSAC member to update you on the most recent development in the Black class action lawsuit, and to get your feedback on how PSAC can better support and serve its members. If any member have questions or need support regarding the Black class action lawsuit, we will put the contact information in the chat. Now I have the privilege to welcome our panelists and to kick off the conversation. It's important that we reflect on the success of Black union leadership and celebrate and recognize the many accomplishments of our communities. I'll direct the first question to all panelists. Here we go. What is or was your journey in becoming a national leader, and what are some key lessons that you learned along the way? And I'll repeat that question. What is or was your journey in becoming a national leader, and what are some lessons that you learned along the way? And I'll start with Mark Eduardo.
Bonsoir tout le monde.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to interact as part of the Black History Month. And as you know, my union activity is primarily in Montreal. And so I'm going to talk, of course, in French. I'll speak in French. But I know that you have simultaneous interpretation. So when I look back at the pathway I followed, I reflect on that question. Well, the first thing which came to mind was the space of my activist action, which is quite simply an example of my parents. My father, Marc-Lionel Joubert, and my mother, Jacqueline. And specifically, the example of my father. I'd just like to take a few moments, if I may, just to share that with you. He came, as we said in the biography, in 1966 to Montreal. My father was a doctor, and he was fleeing the dictatorship of what they called the Papa Doc dictatorship, François Duvalier, who was a dictator. And he came to Quebec as a doctor. And the first memory that I have of different treatment was the fact that my father had to completely retrain as a doctor, since the degrees he had from the Caribbean, from countries from the south, even today it's still the same. They are not recognized. Or they're not recognized as having the same value as degrees, for example, coming from North America, and specifically from Europe. So that's the first injustice that I observed when I was young. To see the work done by my parents, that inspired me. And so later, so I studied in Montreal, and I started to work at the Canada Post Corporation, 1989. And in 2003, I started to get involved as a steward in a postal station in downtown Montreal, which is today called Bridge, which brought together some 300 workers. So I really had to learn very quickly, because there were a lot of people there actually on the work floor. So as a result of that, I really had to do my homework. I had the opportunity to have some union mentors. I'll talk about that a little bit more, because nobody can achieve anything alone. You can't become a leader alone. You have to build through your family, through your structure, or through your circles of friends, or even closer circles of relatives. So from 2003 to 2008, I was a steward. In 2008, I began involved. I was elected in 2008, and I'm proud to say this. I've been elected in various structures in the union. I never had a union job, but I was actually appointed or designated. So people might say to me sometimes, but don't you feel there's some uncertainty? Well, yes, I do. But at the same time, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, as a result of this, I felt obliged to stay close to my members, and I'm very proud about that. In the union, with the CUPW, and I can see Jan. I'm very pleased to see Jan. We don't see each other often enough, Jan. And the lessons that I learned in my union, my original union, of course, they prepared me for my leadership role, which I occupy at the present time as a president of the National Council for Metro Montreal. We have 105 locals from various areas of activity, and we represent in the region 98,000 members. That's a big structure. So we do education work, we do support work to support the locals, which are involved in disputes, for example, strikes, lockouts, bargaining. So it's a very demanding job. But it's such an exciting job. I'm so passionate about it. So every morning I can say I get up to do exactly what I enjoy doing in life. And not everyone has that privilege, even though things haven't been easy. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I do consider this a privilege. And I'll just conclude by saying that for me, the greatest possible privilege is to gain the confidence of the members, to win the trust of the members at all levels of the union, whatever your level. For me, that is absolutely basic. And the fact that I had that career path, if you will, and I think that for leaders, for black leaders, particularly for women, I would say, is a different relationship with time, because it takes longer for women to reach certain responsibilities than it does for our other colleagues coming from the white majority, if you don't mind me saying that. So I learned to be patient. I had to be patient. I'll talk about that later. But I also learned to be persistent as well as patient. I learned to be bold. These things are important if you want to really properly fulfill your role. I'll just stop there because you know I could go on for quite some time. But I think time is going on, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much for joining with us, Mark. And at this point, I'll pose the same question to Jason.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me here. My journey, some people would feel, in latter years may have been somewhat charmed, but it was from the people that I ended up being surrounded with and surrounded myself with. But when I started off, I was, just a 22-year-old young man working in a correctional facility, wondering why people thought racism was okay and why it should just continue on the way it is. And I grew frustrated and lashed out at a bunch of people over and over again. And at the same time, there was this person who I would consider, a great friend and a great trade unionist, was fascinated with how people would depend on me to protect their lives, but at the same time, think mine was lesser than theirs. And that's something that stuck with me for a long, long time. This person that advocated for me in the workplace and helped me out in the workplace, I had to teach them a little bit about my culture, a little bit about where I'm from and stuff like that. But that's been ongoing. That's both the burden and the blessing, I guess, of living at this day and age is the way I look at it. Is some people are tired to teach and to spread the word, and then but it's something that we must do in order to gain allies and gain a good circle of people around you to be able to get to our goal, which is equality, which is equity. So I felt like I came from a union community. So I always was intrigued by the union, but I wanted to give back, and we had an old guard that was leaving. And that old guard, when they were on their way out, it was this other trade unionist and another person that encouraged me to run with them. And so I ran for vice president's position, and I didn't look back. And I turned out to be a little bit of a handful for them. So they wanted me to leave and take a run at the NSGEU board of directors. So I did, and much to everybody's surprise, I was elected. And that was in 2003. And I spent 2 years on the board of directors. I was encouraged to run for third vice president, elected the third vice president, and then elected the first vice president in 2009, and ultimately president of NSGEU in 2016. But throughout those years, I gained so many friends and allies that I could learn from, that I could work with, that I could teach myself. So the lessons that I've learned along the way to get here is to always be open to have the conversations, always, maybe sometimes push the envelope to have that uncomfortable conversation, but to just certainly put your point across, get it across without raising your hands and being angry like the young man at 22 and in jail. But just to be open and have those conversations. I've gained so many allies, so many friends over the years that are now thinking with an anti-racist lens that didn't before, and they're surprised that they didn't as well. But it's always good to have the conversation, to know who you can be around and know who you can share with. Since Mark Edouard gave a shout out to Jan is one of those people. Her and I have had conversations for years now. And there's other people that I'm sure on this panel, watching this panel. And I'm just very thankful to be there. When it came to my national executive board, I made friends across the country that ultimately ended up supporting me in my vision on where we would like to go with the national union. So, as I say, these are things that you need to do to get a movement with you, behind you, and to really be able to deliver on things that are part of your vision. So, that's my story about coming up. And I guess I do have some other things for the other questions as well. But definitely it's about gaining allies. It's about keeping those allies, teaching people, and being willing to be taught yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your story, Jason. And speaking about openness and having the difficult conversations. Yeah, that's insightful. Thank you. And now I'll go to Jan.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for hosting this panel today, Craig. And it's great to be here with Mark Edouard and Jason on this panel. We've met many times, Jason and Mark and I, at the back of the room. The elections are going on, and we're trying to negotiate votes for people to ensure that an equity lens is at all levels of different unions and different organizations. So my story, it's very similar to Mark Edouard. I came here at the age of 3, and I've always faced racism. Many times you were the only, Black girl in a class on a street living. So running for these positions is part of my natural, it's who I am. It's my DNA. So when I began working at Canada Post at a very young age, I was still going to school, doing my homework on the bus, and then, going back to school the next day and going to Canada Post. I became involved pretty quickly because we all know the best mobilizing tool is a bad boss. So we had that very early when I worked at Canada Post, and it made me realize how important it was to work together, to create the critical mass on the work floor to ensure that everybody's voice is heard and that we're all treated fairly. Right away I became involved at the local level, as a shop steward. Then I also worked on different committees, entertainment committee, which was important because it brought families together. A lot of times you work for the union, you don't have time for your family. So it's really important to have the support of your family when you do choose to go on to various roles within the labor movement, or any workplace for that matter. I then became an external organizer, organizing unorganized workers into CUPW. That I like having the one-on-one conversations there and hearing, what barriers other people faced in their workplaces as well. And then from there, I began to work. I ran for the position of National Union Representative at the 2015 11 convention, and I was elected there. And then I ran for the first national vice president, And as Sharon mentioned, I became the first Black woman to ever sit on CUPW's National Executive Board. And then in 2019, I ran for the national president. And I won that position. I didn't win that on my own. There was people out there who came to me and rallied to support, people like Mark Edouard, like Jason, and others who, gave the support that I needed, because you can't do it alone. It's really, really hard to be isolated when you're the only one in an office that might look like you or have a position of leadership. So, what have I learned? I learned that I can't do it alone, and that I had to have a vision, and I can't put the vision forward by myself. So I've been able to make allies on the board and outside of my own union to help to push the agenda forward. I stand on many people's shoulders who have come before me and who I can count on to call and ask them for advice. And their lived experiences have made it easier for myself and others to be there. And I know that when I leave my role by choice, then I'll leave the path for somebody else to be there as well. I find as a Black leader, you're challenged even more. So you need a bit more resilience than others would need. And it's hard some days, but I'm thankful for these kind of panels and to have the honest conversation where some of our allies actually speak up and take on a role and answer the questions that we can't necessarily always answer or are tired of answering. So that'd be my advice to anybody coming up, to ensure that you have a really good circle around you of people who can help you, at work, but also in your own social life, because you need to step away from the union sometimes and have a really good work-life balance, or else you will burn out, and you don't want that. So that's my answer for that question there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jen. And, it seemed as if your paths were somewhat similar. And, I just want to pause for a second, because I'm looking at the screen and what I'm seeing is, some of our most successful union leaders, union activists at the head of the table for major unions here in Canada. This is impressive. This is impressive. And I appreciate your journey, and I want to thank you for everything you've done so far. My next question is, what are some successes and what unique perspectives do you bring to the labor movement as a Black leader? And with that, I'm going to start with Jason.
I'm really lucky now with the team that I have at NUPSI and the National Executive Board that they are open, that I have a voice at that table, and really to be able to share my thoughts, my vision, and for them to acknowledge that my thoughts, my vision is not necessarily the same as theirs. It's something that's strong in a national executive board. These are leaders from all around the country, and we have it that way to where we do not need to be stuck on whatever position we're on, that we need to accept other people's thoughts, other people's voices, and stuff like that. And that is not by mistake. That is through years of work, actually, with our National Executive Board. Just recently at our last convention, where I was elected in June, we passed a resolution that speaks to all voices being around the table. And it names in this resolution all the voices that should be at the National Executive Board. So how we come about that is you cannot control who's elected and who's going to come to your NEB. So our National Executive Board is comprised of leaders from around the country. One thing that we did, myself and my president, Bert Blunden, we reached out to the National Executive Board, trying to say that our NEB is a safe space and asking people to self-identify. And that is something that is very difficult to do. But there was enough trust in us that many did self-identify, to where we realized we were lacking one voice at the table. And we quickly went to rectify that. And so now I can proudly say that the National Union of Public and General Employees has a board of directors that is reflective of every voice that has been identified in our Constitution. But there's other, successes that I feel that I was able to do through my own voice, my own lens. And that's while I was president of NSGEU, I was, able to get my point of view across in terms of policy and demographics to employers. We did some seminars with employers on equity, and they came, they met, we had conversations about how do you change policy, how do you change culture within the workplace. And those are some good successes that went on. And we even had some politicians participate and end up getting the ear of the provincial politicians and stuff like that. Those are things that I quickly recognize the privilege of my position being in the largest public sector union in Nova Scotia, that I have this unique voice that not everybody gets to hear. And I'm able to talk to these leaders and really put forward what my thoughts are. I never claim to speak for every Black person in Canada or Nova Scotia, but I do have my experience. I do have things that I've been through and a lot of issues that I've talked through with people from across the country and everything else. So I don't feel I speak for everyone, but I don't feel I'm far off when I do speak about something. Also, some things that I got to deal with was taking opportunities like this to speak on panels, right? Bring other resolutions to our union. Again, through our National Executive Board, we got to see what the Health Science Association of British Columbia was doing with their members. What they ended up doing was a survey amongst their members. And the results of that survey was not what they thought that they were going to hear. And right now, that union is under a huge transformation to reflect its members, to listen to what was told to them in the poll, and to move forward. So with that, I learned from there, and we brought that to NSGEU, who is now conducting an equity audit, right? And also what they're doing is they have an equity summit, and outgoing last May, we were able to pass a resolution to create an equity seat on the board of directors of NSGEU. So with my union involvement in things that I was able to get my hands into, I don't claim that I'm the author of all of this and made it what it is. But sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and you need to see what's happening in other places, see what works. Learn from that, see what didn't work, and move on and try to implement. So being in this unique position of being a leader, I just have that opportunity to be able to put my best foot forward. So it's going to be easier for the next person as opposed to somebody starting over from scratch when I'm gone. So thank you very much.
Thanks for sharing that, Jason. It's not often we get to talk about our successes, and I really appreciate you sharing that. Jan, is there anything you would like to add at this point, or do you want to tell us about some of your successes?
I think some of my successes are to see that since my election, I've seen a lot of Black leaders take on leadership roles within the locals across the country. Because, just to be elected for myself is the success, but to see people coming behind me, and they're finding their voice and taking their place at the leadership tables throughout our union across the country is a real success, in my opinion. And I'm happy to see that happening. And I'm looking forward to more of people taking on those kind of roles at CUPW.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being a trailblazer and for paving the way for many to follow. Thanks a lot, Jan. And Mark Edward, do you want to share some of your successes or your unique perspectives?
In fact, what Jason is explaining, as well as Jan, really, hits very close to home. I'd like to say it in a few words. For me, one of the major successes is the fact that I've been able to pull other Black leaders in the union movement up, because there's strength in numbers. And it really makes a difference when someone sees a person who looks like them rise up to such positions. It makes a huge difference. And I realized it recently because we had an FTQ campaign on anti-racist movements. And I would like to tell you that I didn't want to have my picture, featuring on on the campaign materials, because in my mind, I was saying to myself, well, I was tired already of seeing my own face in these campaign ad materials. And I thought, well, maybe we need a fresh face. And I'm happy to realize the relevance of this campaign, the success that it recorded, and the fact that it inspired many other Black leaders and has been able to give them the courage to find their own voices. And like Jan and Jason mentioned, that is the only way we can actually have a meaningful impact.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Mark.
All right.
It's great that we have opportunities like this now that we can share our successes because, as you say, our success or your success is an inspiration to others. What I'd like to pose to Jan at this point is, how do we collectively champion a more inclusive movement?
Thanks, Craig. I know at CUPW, we're doing an equity audit. I heard Jason mention his organization is doing one as well. Our equity audit came out of a resolution from our National Human Rights Committee. In our national constitution, we have a human rights committee of the 4 equity groups at our union, and they meet twice a year, and they put forward resolutions to the National Executive Board. And the National Executive Board is then tasked with seeing these through. So on this term, we've been able to hire 2 retirees who've worked in the labor movement to do an amazing job to assist us to getting the equity audit done. The equity audit was to analyze the staff, as well as our leadership at all levels, the local, the region, and national level, and to see who was missing and how we could fill some and fix those gaps. As I mentioned before, we have a national constitution. It's how we work with each other. It's our collective agreement with each other, and we modify it every 4 years. But there's a lot of barriers within our national constitution that we've learned that stop Black people as well as other equity groups from actually advancing and participating in the union. There's many barriers in regards to attendance to attend the convention. Each local has their own bylaws, as Mark mentioned before, as well as we have educationals. But, with childcare issues, a lot of Black folks don't have families here to watch their child for childcare issues. So therefore, that's another barrier. A lot of times as a racialized person or the Black woman you don't have the required skills. And a lot of those skills are given at the education that you can attend. So therefore, by having the equity audit, we can see what barriers we need to remove at our next convention and look at ways how to be more inclusive. Like Jason mentioned, they put an equity seat there to ensure that all voices are at their leadership table. And we hope one day to do the same at CUPW. Like, I was very fortunate that I was elected to the position, at the convention, but everybody is going to face that. And I know, like, if I leave and when I leave, will somebody replace me who looks like me? It's a really hard thing. So the equity audit for us at CUPW is a really important thing, and we need people to fill in that. I think we're also very unique because at CUPW, we're all elected to our National Executive Board as well as to our regional offices. So therefore, our employer, which the majority is at Canada Post, has also to have a member workers on the work floor who are of equity groups. And if that's not happening, then we're not able to have the diversity we need at the union as well. I know with you at PSAC, Craig, you guys are doing some equity work right now with your staff. So therefore, I applaud you for looking at that. And I know that the class action lawsuit is happening right now. And I hope, that the outcome will be one that will make things a lot better for all of us. Because many times we're bypassed in roles that we know that we deserve, and we're asked to train people to take on the roles that say we're not qualified to have. So beyond the equity audit, we have to ensure that there's training, and that when we do go to forums where we can actually vote, that the people looking like us are actually there. So for us, I think the next step after the equity audit will be to have the board pass resolutions to ensure that the barriers that we have in the Constitution are removed, to make sure that everybody has a chance and to level the playing field for all equity people, especially Black workers like myself. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jan. That speaks about removing barriers and, how we do that and how we succession plan for who's coming behind us, right? At this point, Mark, can you share regarding this question?
Oui, bien sûr. En fait, pour faire la promotion d'un mouvement syndical plus inclusif, j'ai envie de dire au départ, il faut savoir de quoi on parle exactement. Et je m'explique. Dans beaucoup d'organisations syndicales, et là, je suis content d'avoir écouté
sorry, Mark, I don't mean to cut you off.
So, interpreter's fault. Sorry, can you hear the interpreter now? My apologies. I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong button. My apologies. So I just start again. My apologies. So what I want to say, therefore, is in order to promote the union movement, which will be more inclusive, I just say, first of all, that we have to determine what we're talking about. Let me just explain this. In many organizations, union organizations, when you ask this question, what is the makeup of your members who actually come from racialized communities? Well, we don't know what the answer is going to be. And I just want to say this, because for me this is absolutely fundamental, that you can't improve in the structure anything that you're not measuring. First, you have to be able to measure things. That's absolutely crucial. And I constantly repeat this in the FTQ. You have to know that the union executive has some idea of who our members are. And then we can implement measures. We can implement measures in order to ensure we have greater equity. That's the first thing. I'll just stop on this. I think we also have to ask questions on the structures of our union. Because when you're talking about resolutions in our conventions, for example, then most of the resolutions are just with a simple majority. You raise your hand. But when, for example, you ask to have a seat for equity, or when you try and change the structure in the union, now you can see what I'm getting at here, then change then has to be adopted by 2/3, because that's what it says in the Constitution. Because in fact, we're asking minority groups to try and influence 2/3 of the majority group so as to better share the power. In order to ensure that you have more adequate representation. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's an obstacle. This is a barrier which has to be discussed because it makes things really difficult in our structures. So I think, therefore, it's also very important. It's very important to be resilient and determined on that question. And you have to keep on bringing it up in our organizations, our union organizations. And that's the way we actually promote it. I think it's something which has to be done consistently, constantly, and in the long term.
Think about this is while John was speaking about paving the way and succession planning, Mark, you hit it right on the head when you tackle the systemic barriers, the systemic issues that's there that no matter what we do, we still have to overcome those before we move forward. At this point, I'm dying to hear what Jason has to offer at this point.
Joking. Thank you both for those answers. I think I'm right up the same line that you guys are. I will start with change. Like, we need to change our policies. We need to open up space for people. We're all for one and one for all, but our structures really don't reflect that. I mean, when we take that deep look into ourselves, and then we look at who our elected leadership is, what does our membership look like? Are they both reflected there? I think we can confidently say no, it hasn't been the case leading up till now. But also, what does our membership have to say about it? Like I said earlier, and you spoke about, Craig, as well, our organizations are doing equity audits and want to do equity audits. We need to do that. We need to find out what our members are saying. Right. But then there's a challenge within that of people within our membership, but in our communities as well, that feel threatened by self-identifying. We need to make self-identifying safe for people, like to know that the union's intentions our good or are in their best interest, in our best interest to be the best democratic space that we can be. And I'm talking as union as a whole. So those are issues that we run up against, but then that's not even to talk about our collective agreements. Are they fair? Is the seniority rule that we have fair? Is the layoff provisions that we have fair for everybody? And I'm not looking at it from just a flat out fairness lens. I'm looking at it from an equity lens. I'm looking at it from, a bunch of Black people in this workplace were the last ones in, and they're going to be the first ones out, right? So what are things that can recruit people, but also retain them and keep them, and work with employers to do that kind of stuff? Is there change needed? And I'll say it again because I cannot stress it enough. What is our membership saying? We need to be listening to the membership. And because Jan, as she said, she can't do it alone, nor does Jan, Mark, or myself have all the answers. But I'll tell you one thing, our members know what's going on. People within our community know what's going on, and we need to keep our ears open and try and use our influence to make that change happen. So thank you. Awesome.
So we need to create safe spaces. We need to remove those barriers. We need to tackle the systemic structures that exist. What I'm going to go to Mark Edward at this point, what I'm asking, Mark, is what support do Black leaders and activists need to thrive in the labor movement?
J'aime beaucoup cette question.
Well, I very much appreciate that question. I would say, well, first, from a human point of view, Jan mentioned something which was very important earlier. She said that sometimes we're the only Black person on the street, the only Black person in a classroom, the only Black person, for example, in the playground in school. And that's where I grew up. So in answer to that question, I would say the support that we need, that Black leaders need, be they men, be they women, I think the first thing that we need to know is that we are not alone. Because the problem which often happens is this: we're so active, busy in our structures, that sometimes we don't take the time to network with other leaders, with other union movements. So, it's like a life in parallel. You're going along in parallel. And if you're like me, then sometimes you can feel a bit discouraged. You can feel weary. You can feel tired. You can feel impatient also, because some changes are not being implemented as quickly as we'd like. So for me, the support that we have to give one another, I would call this a self-help network. So, for example, a discussion like this evening, a seminar like the evening, or organizations like CBTU, they're so important because it enables us to discuss issues, to share our experiences, and to realize that often there are a number of communities within the action that we take. In order to overcome, we can use our community again to overcome these obstacles. So the fact that we realize then that we're not alone in dealing with these obstacles, that's absolutely crucial. And something else I want to mention also, which is very important in my view, is we have to be aware, and this has come up on a number of occasions, we have to be aware, we have to realize that the group will always go a lot further than individuals will go. You will go a lot further as a group than you will as an individual. So the strength of the group is crucial in our organizations, or by networking with other organizations. I often say this: I don't want to be the best player on, for example, the issue of systemic racism, or on representation of Black leaders in the union movement. I'm not interested in being the best player on this. What I am interested in doing is to play on the best team. That's what I want, to play on the best team. And I think that the union still represents in today's society the best possible team in order to move justice forward, racial justice, to move it forward. We can see there are obstacles in organizations, in corporations, even in crown corporations. Government organizations, for example, Jan and I belong to one. In our jobs, for example, the Canada Post, there are still obstacles there. So I think the force of the group, the strength of the group is essential. I also think it's very important to try and create this kind of space, like the space we're in this evening, to have these difficult conversations, despite what a lot of people think. The discussions that we have, the difficult discussions in the union movement, they don't divide people, those difficult discussions, they unite people. And to have the strength as a union that we want to have, it's important not to be divided. It's important not to be fragmented. It's important not to be opposed to one another. So I often say that this self-help, this mutual assistance network, well, of course, this involves union colleagues. It involves friends. It involves your social circles. It's people that share the same values that we have. Because if you don't have that, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to deal with the pressure because the pressure is enormous. There's opposite pressure coming from the other direction on you. So you need a group. You need a group. Sometimes I compare us to trees. We're like trees, the black leaders. And I think we need roots, really deep roots. But it requires other people also to nurture these roots. Otherwise the tree won't grow. And what will happen is we'll just dry out. And we don't want that.
That's a powerful analogy. We need roots. And, hearing you talk about self-help group and surrounding ourselves with like-minded people so that we can have that escape. That was very powerful, Mark. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. What I'd like to go to Jason and see if you'd like to, how you would address that question.
Well, I agree with everything that Mark said. And earlier tonight, Jan said it as well. We cannot do this alone. So I spent my career making friends, making allies. Made a few enemies, I guess, too. But just simply making allies in working with people and in working on people to be anti-racist, not to just be not prejudiced or whatever the thought might be in their heads. I really try to convey to people that you need to take an active role in preserving what is right and to become actually anti-racist. And it's the hardest thing that you can do. So I invest a lot of my time whenever I get an opportunity to talk about what it's like to be my friend, what it's like to be an ally of mine. And, I come from a workplace where you study people anyway, where you tend to look and see where they're at and what their actions were and everything else. So some people I don't have to do that. They're just naturals. And I gravitate towards them as well. But you absolutely need a crew of people that that can help spread the word, people in influence and able to spread it to somebody else, to make that connection with you and somebody else that you can continue on. As I said, it's a blessing to be able to do that because I'm in this position. And some may look at it as the burden as well, because you're constantly working, trying to get people to really not be accepting of people having a racist lens. Right. So, you absolutely need friends and allies. That's a long answer to tell you what you need. But it all starts there, and it's by holding on to those friends and to working with those friends in order to change policy within your organizations and to push forward. But once I have those friends, I can reach out to people such as, Jan, such as Seema, such as, I've had conversations with many people and actually a few PSAC people. But I look back to to what the labor movement looked like when I was coming up. And the only person I seen that looked like me was Marie Clark Walker. And she did great in her role. And it was really good to see her in her role do that, because it was inspiring. And look where we're at right now, to be able to be leaders. So when I finally got to meet her, I had conversations with her and stuff like that. And any conversation that I can have with a leader or somebody that's been through it is a very valuable conversation. And to have that network. While I was with the NSGU, I had struggles getting to CBTU member meetings because they're in Ontario, right? And I was in Nova Scotia. And now in this role, there's an expectation for the National Union to take a larger role in the CBTU. So that's where I come in, and that's where I'm going to do that. But I already know there's a network of people there that I do know. It's just I'll be tapped into them again, which would be very good for me because, again, we don't do it on our own.
So we hear about, planting our roots and building our network, right? So Jan, what support do Black leaders and activists need to thrive in the labor movement? What's your take on this?
Well, to add on to what Mark and Jason both said, once we plant the roots there, we do need the support. And for that, I think, we need to be treated like how white leaders are treated. There's an extra barrier for us to be, can we give it, for example, as an intersectional woman who's like a Black and woman as well, when I go into a room and I give an idea, a lot of times, it's okay, whatever. And then when a white man said the exact thing that I just said, he's a genius. I know women all experience that every day when we go into our workplaces, right? And I think also for them to understand that, we're here to make the labor movement better. We're not going to take away anything from it. We're going to bring an extra lens of analysis and move forward the agenda of the labor movement and make it more inclusive and more diverse, and to not be afraid of us, to understand that we're there for the same reason they are. We want to take care of our family and make society a better place for everybody. But it's hard when you face all the challenges every day when you go into work and you know that you have to be, beyond 100% ready, like 150% ready for every meeting. It makes you tired. But at the end of the day, you have to stand your ground, because I feel that if we don't, then nobody will be able to come behind us. We have to leave the door open and pull others behind us. And like Mark said, Marie Clark Walker, Janice Geary, Carol Wall, these are women who have paved the way for all of us. And I don't think any of us would be here without them. And I want to make sure that when I leave this role, or Jason or Mark or Craig choose to leave the role, that there's some behind who'll say, that we help them to get to where they need to be as well. And I think that for all of us, that's what we need. We need the support, we need the respect, and we need people to understand that they must make space for us. Because, we deserve to be here. We've done the training, we have the education, the knowledge, and the experience, and we're not asking for anything. We deserve to be there.
Good mentorship, right? It's amazing some of the names that you just mentioned. I was in Toronto this past weekend and I bumped into Marie Clark Walker and she just, one question, how are you doing, brother? And that was it. It's like everything just came pouring out, right? So it's having people like that who you can lean on that really supports you sometimes, right? So at this point, I'm going to go back to Jason. This question will be for all the panelists, but I'm going to start with Jason. What advice would you give Black activists who want to take on leadership position? So what advice would you give to Black activists who want to take on leadership positions? Over to you, Jason.
All right. My theme for tonight has been be ready to teach, be ready to advise, be ready to advocate, right? Just simply go for it. Also, what I would say is you have your leadership abilities, you're an activist already, to put them on display. Let people see who you are and what you're doing. Because one thing I learned from the trade union movement is you can't deny those that deliver. And people that deliver, they tend to get people behind them. They tend to get a good following, and their name gets out there. We're over 1 million people across the trade union movement is over 1 million people, or a couple of million people across this country. But the names of people hear your name, and never think that people aren't watching and people aren't paying attention. Our organizations are under let's just say they're under construction. They're changing. They're morphing. They are growing, and we're growing into becoming what we should be in terms of inclusivity, in terms of having that equality across the board. So just believe in it. Go for it. When it came to me, I had a choice at one point. Am I going to, do all this work with my employer, or am I going to continue on doing the work that I'm doing in the union? Of course, I went with the union. That was a safe space for me. That's a place where a rank didn't matter. That's just a place where I got to be me. So just show yourself, be yourself, and come out and hold your representatives to account as well. You might have some issues that come out, and sometimes conflict does happen, but you need to hold your ground. When it comes to union politics, some things can get a little ugly from time to time, but what you need to do is be consistent with who you are and hold people to account, and make sure that space around you is surrounded by people who are like-minded like you. And you'll be able to grow and become a leader within the trade union movement. And also, I'll speak for the other two panelists here. Give us a call. Let's have a chat, right? I'm open. I will talk to anybody at any time, as long as I got the moment, or I'll get back to you. So you can reach out to me or any of the other panelists, because we've probably been through a few things that you're going through or been through, and it never hurts to talk about it. So that would be my advice to anybody who's looking to take on a leadership role.
Hey, thank you very much for that, Jason. What I'm hearing is to be consistent in your approach and reach out to others, see what they say, right? Jan, how would you answer that question?
Well, thanks. For me, I would tell any up-and-coming activists to ensure that they know the structures and the policies of their unions. Because, right away, like I said before, you're going to hear you don't have the knowledge or the experience to take on the leadership roles. But by knowing the structure and knowing your constitution, as Mark mentioned earlier on, you're able to figure out what you need to create the critical mass to move you forward and put forward your ideas. But also to know that, that there's space at the leadership table for more than just one Black person. Because you find this crabs in a barrel mentality where there's only room for one Black person. But that's not true. There's room for all of us at the table. And I think it's really important that also they take care of themselves and know that it's okay to say, I need help and I don't know the answer. Because people more respect you for giving that answer than trying to make up an answer. And a lot of times, too, I think, you feel that you have to fake it until you make it, but you don't. We do have the experience. We do have the knowledge. We have the lived experiences that we can turn into structural experiences. So a lot of times you're not given the chance to lead those meetings because you're not at the meeting itself because you're not there. You have the barriers of maybe having childcare, like I mentioned earlier on. But I think they have to, have a plan, have a vision, and understand the structure of their unions or where they're working, and ensure they have a critical mass behind them to support them at work, but also at home. Because sometimes when you're isolated as the only person at work, when you drive home from work some days, you need to go home. And the family support is the best place to be. But also don't talk about the union all the time. Have other outlets in your life that you actually can enjoy and debrief and just enjoy yourself and say, hey, tomorrow it's going to be another day and that I'm going to be okay. And today I did the best that I could do.
I thought that speaks to a little bit of self-care, right? How do you protect yourself? Thanks for sharing that, Jan. Mark Edward?
Tellement de choses à dire.
So many things to say here. What advice would I give? I would say listen. First thing is to listen to the membership. I talked about the analogy of the tree earlier on, but the earth that feeds the roots of that tree are our membership. So that is critical. And I think you also need to have a plan, a concrete plan. Third thing, when you have a practical or concrete plan, you need to ask yourself, what do I want to change? What do I want to see evolve in my union structure? So it has to be clear in your mind. Otherwise, you just be navigating the system, right? It will be more like, a ship that's sailing. I think you need to have a clear objective in mind. And the last thing, act. Act on all of that. Because sometimes we spend time, procrastinating, asking ourselves questions. But for things to move, we need to be the drivers of that change. You need to have an initial idea. You need to build on that idea, and then you need to act. I really loved what has been mentioned before, and I'd like to add to that. I would say my advice to most Black leaders is not to, heap too much unnecessary pressure on their shoulders. We are used to being, the overperformers, right? Because for us to gain recognition and acknowledgement, we work 1.5 times, 2 times more, 3 times more than the normal level of the other union leaders. And that, my friends, is unhealthy. Period. It's unhealthy. It doesn't help us. And that is not something that you can do sustainably. You need to take care of yourselves. And I also say that we need to use our time wisely, because some people will question us, question our beliefs, but we need to understand exactly what are the intentions of those people constantly pushing us every now and then, which is why I say we need to act with those who want to move forward in the same direction. Now, to conclude, I'll come back to my analogy of the tree, because I want to end with that. Now, I want to quote a small statement here. Sometimes I tell union leaders to be like a tree. Now, shed your leaves, but do not change or lose your roots. Shed your ideas, but keep your principles. For me, this is fundamental. Why? Because there's a lot of winds. There's lots of headwinds for union leaders. And you need to be able to stay grounded. You need to stay strong. And that's what I want to say. And I think we're really seeing a beautiful moment in the union movement right now. And thank you once more for this beautiful conversation.
Your analogy about a tree it's just like right on. So we're taking a question from the audience, and it is as has been seen, it's really difficult as Black leaders. It can take a serious toll on your mental health. So what are you doing to ensure self-care, which is extremely important for us as Black leaders? And it is, what are you doing to ensure self-care? And I'll start with Jan in this one.
Thank you very much for that. For me, for mental health and self-care, I've learned to step away and say, the work's going to be there tomorrow when I get back. And I began to take my holiday. We've negotiated annual leave and many collective agreements across the country. We know we just got some more personal days from the government. So I'm going to actually use those. For a long time, you wouldn't take your time off because you had to get everything done yesterday. And I recognized that when I was going to meetings before with white leaders, they weren't on their laptops typing away. They, when they're at the meeting, and that is it. But I thought I had to get the work done as well. But talking to other young Black women coming behind me, they said, you're making it very hard for us if you work like that, because then they expect all of us to work like that. They have young kids, and my son's older, so I was able to take a bit more time away. So for me, I put my out of office memo on every evening. People know I'm going to answer your email when I get back to work the next day. I put boundaries in regards to my work-life balance. And, I've disconnected from Facebook because I find, you're on your phone so much. And as Black people, we know our mental health and eating properly is very important for us as well, because we know we have a lot of history of illnesses within the Black community. So for me, the mental health issue has really been to step back and recognize that others can take on some of the the work. I've learned to delegate, but I've also learned to recognize that tomorrow the work will still be there. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jan. You know, sometimes we really need to step back and realize that as well. You know, no matter what we do, the work will be here tomorrow. But Mark, what do you do for self-care?
My answer may surprise you. For some years now, I've learned to say no. Simply because as union members, union activists, specifically Black union activists, oftentimes we don't want to disappoint, right? And I really love what Jan just mentioned. At some point, there's got to be a limit. So I've learned to draw the line. I've learned to, limit myself in terms of energy, in terms of the time that I dedicate to certain things. Sometimes you have projects that drain your energy, and you can't be on 5 or 6 or 7 projects at the same time. So it's important to take a step back. I'd like to say that I'm someone who loves music a lot. I play the piano, and reconnecting sometimes with the things that you love to do, the things that make you happy. And sometimes I would say in jest to people, well, don't give me a meeting on a Sunday afternoon, please. Because I'm trying to stay home with my sons. I'm trying to have brunch with my loved ones, to have a good conversation, just to have time for myself, and to maybe do your grocery stores, to place your orders, because very often we work weekends and we work unstoppably. And I think that the notion of placing those limits is not just it is not just us on an individual level who are going to save the union movement. We are a collective movement. The work is going to be there. The challenges will always be there. The issues will be there. The problems will be there. We have some of the solutions, not all of them. So I think the earth will continue to revolve, right? Without Marc Edouard. And a few years ago, I used to think, well, if I go missing, what's going to happen? It's going to be disaster, right? But no. The world will continue moving on with or without me. So I think it takes some dose, a healthy amount of humility on the extent of our actions as union members.
Thanks, Mark. That was brilliant. Jason, how do you deal with self-care? How do you approach it?
That was brilliant. Thank you, Mark. As you know, I come from a workplace that is highly stressful in a corrections setting. And I learned a long time ago that you need to take your breaks. You need to have other things outside of what it is in your work. Unfortunately for me, my other thing was the union. I love doing my union work and everything else. Now, mind you, I still like to go on vacation and I like to do stuff, but I admit myself, I have a hard time unplugging, disconnecting entirely. So I still know what you're supposed to do. I don't necessarily practice it myself right now, and that is to disconnect, take your time, and reset yourself. I still get that to an extent, but as Mark said, and I'm taking your advice, brother. I'm going to be. The world is still going, the earth is still going to revolve, right? So that's one thing that we need to keep telling ourselves is that time still goes on. We do have projects. We need to learn how to delegate, and we need to learn how to disconnect when it's time to disconnect.
Yeah, I think that's a lot easier said than done, Jason. I think we're mostly addicted to our devices, and one of the hardest things is to turn off your cell phone and put it away, right? But we need to. We absolutely need to. And this other question came in from the chat, and it kind of hit home because I struggled with this as well. And the question is, how would you go about dealing with imposter syndrome in union activity space, especially in the early stages of involvement? How do you get rid of those feelings on non-belonging in these so-called progressive spaces? And I want to start with Mark on that one.
I love that question. Oh, yeah. In fact, I want to start from the end of the question. What I've learned so far is that I need to identify very clearly what a progressist environment is, because in the union movement, there are so-called progressist forums, and when you sit around the table with those forums, you're asking yourself, why do I feel like I'm going backwards? Why do I feel like I'm dragging a heavy weight? Why do I feel like I'm the only person pushing forward this idea or this notion? And at the end of those questions, in my mind, I've often realized that sometimes I was not actually in a progressive environment. Because it's not because you are in a union movement that you're automatically in a progressive or progressist movement. Because sometimes some union movements are actually very backward leaning. Now, talking about the imposter syndrome, I think I'll come back to the fact that you should not place unnecessary pressure on your shoulders. Because I've often told myself, and my father used to tell me this, do not show up for an official assignment, for an official function, unprepared. Of course, you will never know everything. You will never master every aspect of the topic. But I think from the moment you're well prepared, you have an understanding of your topic, you understand the issues and the different connectivity, the different aspects that connect the issues, that helps you to deal with the imposter syndrome. And I'd say this very respectfully. Unfortunately, sometimes white privilege avoids actually takes that imposter syndrome away from the shoulders of some people. And we are the ones as Black people who always put ourselves in that situation where we think we want to prove things and we want to overperform, we want to become overachievers. And I've learned over time that it is completely uncalled for, it is unnecessary, it is counterproductive, not just for you as an individual and as a community, but also for the union. And I'd like to conclude by saying that I like the term progressive, and from my experience, the progressives are not as progressive as they sometimes purport to be. That's what I'd like to say to conclude.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I think, when you exhale, and when I listen to you speak and I exhale and I think about this, it's, what is a progressive space anyways, right? That's what really rings out. Jan, how would you take on that question?
Yeah, to follow up to what Mark was saying, for example, I know for myself, you have to tone switch when you go to work, because a lot of times people, your English isn't the way how other Black people's is. It's like, we've all gone to the same school and we've all had the same opportunities. And I've realized now in my role, I'm very proud that I'm from the Caribbean, from Barbados, and I don't change who I am. Every chance I get, I drop in an African proverb, a Caribbean saying, so people can understand this is who I am, and it's time that you accept that I'm here and you learn a little bit about me. I've taken the time to learn about you, and now it's time for you to learn about me. And I think people realize now that, it's going to happen whether they like it or not. And I'm not going to go into a room anymore. I'm always prepared, probably over-prepared, as Mark said, because you have to be over-prepared. And I think, I have to respect myself and be my authentic self in every room that I go. And like Mark said, people want to pretend that it's a progressive space. It's a progressive space once you're saying what people want you to say. But the minute you push the envelope and try and push an agenda they're not comfortable with, then it's not a progressive space anymore. So I think by every day putting a little bit of who you are, your authentic selves into every meeting, every room, every platform you're on, like even today, it gives a chance for you to not have to go to work and not have to tone switch and not have to, change who you are, let people know who we are, and those coming behind us can be their authentic selves their entire time, not so late in our careers or life at the union movement. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jen. I mean, thinking about our authentic self, the easiest way to put it, like, I'm the best person for being me, right? So thanks for sharing that. Jason, what's your take on the question?
Yeah, well, they had me at so-called, right? So so-called progressive spaces because, just in general, by name, anything that the union's hosting is progressive, right? But it may not necessarily be a progressive bunch in that room at that time. And I think that's a very good point that you make there, Jan. And your point, Mark, was really, really good as well. But I want to touch on just two other small pieces of it, just by simply saying, I've dealt with what you're dealing with myself. Like, I've gone into meetings putting people on pedestals saying, wow, look at that leader, look at this person, and thinking, like, making things up about who they are in my mind, as opposed to getting to know who they are, what they're doing, just simply by them holding a position. Sometimes you learn, hey, your local leader, you might have progressed further than them, right? So never hold yourself lower than somebody, to really just, give respect to the position, I guess. That's what I like to do, but not just to think that I'm not worthy of being there. And I did suffer from that early on. And I have to tell you as well, the slow times for me were Christmas time and summertime. Those are the slow times. That's how it worked with the union that I used to be with. And while I was a VP, not one summer went by that I didn't question myself. Will I continue on in September, or am I going to move on and do something else? That was my reset time. And, the first few times I felt ashamed of it. And then after that, I just learned, no. This is me just reevaluating things and seeing if I'm going to move on with this. Am I going to continue on, or what is my plan going forward? So it's almost like the New Year's resolution, so to speak. But I just want to reiterate, when I come in to any space, you're seeing me right now. I'm Jason, and I can be spoken to like Jason. In Jan's case, you could tell me off all the time because she ends up having to do that from time to time with me. But you need to be your true self, like Jan said. You need to just be you. And I found the union space was a place that once I seen everything that was going on, I was enjoying some successes because I was being me. And maybe some people don't like you and who you are, but hey, as long as you're going to be you and true to yourself, you're going to feel good about yourself at the end of the day. If you're pushing forward some progressive agenda or some good ideas, then so be it. If they get adopted, that's great. If not, keep pushing. So that's my only thoughts on that question. Is I think we've all been there.
Thanks for that, Jason. And I'm a bit cognizant of the time right now, so we won't go into another question. But what I'm going to propose is we do maybe a minute and a half wrap up with each of our panelists. And I'd like to start with Mark. Final thoughts.
Tout d'abord, je veux remercier vraiment.
First, I really want to thank you. I want to thank the Public Service Alliance for this opportunity. So really, the context of this discussion is really Black History Month. And I think we have to celebrate this. We have to recognize the achievements of Black union leaders all across the country. And we try also and work with union leaders in Quebec, for example. But in conclusion, I just want to say that sometimes people ask me, Mark, why are you so active? in the struggle to combat racism and to promote black workers? And my answer to this is the following. The union movement can no longer afford to be divided. And I think you all know what the political context is at the moment across Canada, with the rise of the Conservatives and also the rise of the Conservatives in Quebec. The union movement has to retain its legitimacy. And our legitimacy is that we bring together and that we represent all our members who are working, all our members, including members who belong to equity groups, or members of colour, black members, members from the First Nations. That's the very function of the union. That's the role of the union, to defend these people. And we have to remind ourselves of our principles, of our ethics, our union ethics. Our responsibility is to bring people together, not to divide people, not to exclude people, not to humiliate people, not to stigmatize people or groups, but rather to include everybody. And to promote, I want to use the word emancipation, but emancipation in the sense, in a structural sense, in a union sense. Everybody should feel that there's a burst of enthusiasm to get involved in the union. And this is what motivates me in discussions we're having at the present time. I think we have to recognize who we are, we have to act, and we have to bring about change. Change which will make our movement even more inclusive. That's it for me. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Union, but most importantly, be deliberate in our approach. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Jan, a minute and a half for your final thoughts.
Thank you. Like Mark, I want to say thank you very much for pulling this panel together during Black History Month. And it's a really important conversation we're having today. And I want people to know that at the end of the day, like Mark said, we need to create an inclusive union. Our fight is not with each other. It's with a government that's attacking us. It's with our employers who are, not respecting our health and safety. You have the Black Action lawsuit because so many Black workers were held back for decades. And we need to come together and fight for these things. We also have to recognize that the young Black leaders coming up behind us, for them to know that they are enough and that they have a space at any table that they want to be at, and they must take their place. And myself, Jason, Mark, and who we mentioned on this call today, we're there to help them. And don't let anybody think that you're not, tell you can't run for a position. You can run for any position that you want, but make sure you know that you have the critical mass behind you, because your mental health is the most important thing, because we're all replaceable. But at the end of the day, your family and your integrity is what's very important to you. So I encourage everybody to take their space that they want to be at. And don't let anybody change who you are or make you question yourself, that your ability to do the job that you want to do. And again, I want to thank you for having this really important panel. And I hope tomorrow when folks go back to their workplaces, they say what happened at the panel, and encourage others to participate in panels, that are happening throughout this Black History Month. This is a chance for them to have conversations about each and every one of us who come with a Black lens. But beyond February, there's also other days you can talk to us as well, not only in the month of February.
Thank you. Well said, Jan. Over to you, Jason. A minute and a half.
I just want to thank PSAC for having me. It truly is a privilege to be here. And I just, my only parting words to everyone is keep talking, keep attending panels like this, keep talking. I've learned from people, talking to people and meeting with people. And anytime anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can reach out to me as well. I'm quite accessible. But I want to wish everybody well in their journey, and certainly hope that we do start seeing more Black leaders emerge, because that needs to be encouraged in our unions. And it is by mouth right now. It definitely isn't by policy, and we're getting towards that. And as Mark said earlier, this is a beautiful time in the labor movement, and this is where we need to seize the moment and step up. So any support I can put your way, please reach out and have a conversation anytime. Take care.
Awesome. And with that, I want to a big thank you to our panelists. to those of you who have taken the time to join us tonight, and to our staff, interpretation, and technical team for making this event happen. Thank you again, and good night.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone.
Yeah, bye bye.